Thank you so much, Babette. We're going to take questions at the end of the morning, just after my talk. Here I am. So, when we think of Naples, we naturally think of Italy. But for those who lived in the 17th century, Naples wasn't exactly Italy. Actually, Italy did not exist as a nation yet. It was rather composed of multiple states, either independent republics or principalities. The two most important were the Papal States, governed by the Pope, and the Vice-Kingdom of Naples, ruled by the Spanish crown and run by viceroys. These latter were coming from Spanish high aristocracy, and in Naples, they were acting as the monarch representative for a period of more or less 5 years. Often, they had served before as ambassador to the Holy See in Rome. My talk will therefore focus on the role and contributions of those eminent figures as collectors and tastemakers. A story that will take us back and forth across the Mediterranean Sea, involving many interesting characters and showcasing two major talents, the Lombard painter Michelangelo Merisi, better known as Caravaggio, and the Spanish-born artist Giuseppe de Ribera. Looking for a safe place, Naples was a good option for Caravaggio when, after he accidentally killed a man, he had to flee Rome to escape papal justice. Caravaggio has always been close to Spanish circles. When he was born in Milan in 1571, his native city has been under Spanish domination for almost 15 years. His first protector there, Costanza Sforza, Marchioness of Caravaggio, was born a Colonna, hence member of a very old and important Roman family, famously Hispanophile. In Rome, some of his first acquaintances were Sicilian, so subjects of the King of Spain, and two of his most important patrons were Genovese bankers in close business relationship with the Iberian Peninsula. In 1606, when refuge was needed for Caravaggio, he naturally benefited from the protection of the Colonna family, who first welcomed him in their estates in the outskirts of Rome, and then probably helped him to safely reach Naples, where papal justice had no authority. On this basis, it has been argued that the Madonna of the Rosary altarpiece, now in Vienna, may have been painted for a member of the Colonna family. Likely Luigi Colonna Carafa, overlord of Zangaralo, Palestrina, and Pagliano, all places where Caravaggio is supposed to have stayed for a little while, according to his first biographers, Giulio Mancini and Giovanni Baglioni. Here is a view of the Colonna Palace in Zangaralo here, no Palazzo Rospigliosi. An element may support this hypothesis, and this is the prominent presence of a column on the far left of the composition, here, right above what seems to be the portrait of the donor and commissioner of the altarpiece. The column was the emblem of the Colonna family, as well as their name. Colonna means column in Italian. From there, they developed the habit of representing columns not only on their coat of arms, but everywhere as a symbol of their presence and authority. You see examples here at the Colonna Palace in Zingaralo. Somehow, the altarpiece never happened to be installed anywhere and was eventually bought in Naples by the northern painter Louis Finson, who took it to Amsterdam and sold it there. Another hypothesis, supported by Antonio Vanulli, has proposed to identify the donor in the painting as the Duke of Benavente, Viceroy of Naples between 1603 and 1610 because of their physical resemblance. Juan Alfonso Pimentel de Herrera, 5th Duke of Benavente, was a very powerful Spanish nobleman and a true admirer of Caravaggio. He formed his collection in Italy and especially in Naples before shipping it to Valladolid, Spain in 1607. In 1611, an inventory of his holdings describes no fewer than 3 paintings by Caravaggio. One was a representation of Saint Gennaro, patron of Naples, perhaps known today through this copy in a private collection. The second, we have no idea what it looked like, depicted Christ washing the feet of the apostles. The third one, and the only one that survived, is the crucifixion of Saint Andrew, now at the Cleveland Museum of Art. This one is the most eloquent painting Caravaggio has ever done. And it's actually about eloquence, for in his Legenda Aurea, the medieval author Jacobus de Voragine reports that, tied on the cross, Andrew kept preaching and converting people for 2 entire days. That's exactly what Caravaggio has painted here in this painting. The cross itself is not the usual X-shaped Greek cross, but the T-shaped Latin cross, following the recent recommendations of both Cardinal Baronio and Johannes Molanus, a Jesuit priest. The old woman with the goiter on the left may relate to Saint Andrew as the patron of those with throat affliction. It was also a very common disease in Naples at the time. Replacing Benavente, Pedro Fernandez de Castro, 7th Count of Lemos, was appointed viceroy in 1610. He is sometimes said to have owned Caravaggio's Salome with the head of the Baptist that is now at the Royal Palace in Madrid. What is sure is that his brother, Francisco, Spanish ambassador in Rome in the same years, 1609, 1615, had a passion for Caravaggesque art and commissioned paintings from Saraceni and Borgiani, 2 Roman followers of Caravaggio. What is also sure is that Francisco's secretary, the Naples-based Juan de Lescano, had at least 2 paintings related to Caravaggio. One is the Ecce Homo, now in Genova, painted for but never delivered to Cardinal Massimo Massimi. The other is a copy after the Saint Francis in Meditation, sent by the artist to Benedetto Alla, head of the Papal Court of Justice in Rome, in the hope, probably, of forgiveness. Significantly, both paintings are of the same date, a crucial moment when Caravaggio was on the run, and for sure a good timing for a collector with strong connections in Naples, where the painter would eventually settle. In those same years, another Spanish avid collector was present in Naples, Juan de Tassis y Peralta, 2nd Count of Villa Mediana. Villa Mediana is usually associated with 2 paintings by Caravaggio. One of them is now attributed to the Caravaggesque painter Bartolomeo Cavarozzi, this one, this painting is in Philadelphia. But for what Villa Mediana is very famous in this field is his attempt to buy the gigantic altarpiece Caravaggio had painted for a Neapolitan charity institution, the Piemonte della Misericordia. It's the first commission Caravaggio got in Naples. Fortunately for Naples, Villa Mediana didn't get allowed to purchase the painting, which still remains today in the chapel it was painted for. Nevertheless, he got offered to have a copy made of it, with the suggestion of 2 artists who could do the job. Whether he followed up or not remains unclear, but it seems that the copy never happened to be executed. After this first generation of Spanish viceroys from 1603 to 1616, new personalities took over the stage. Their time matches perfectly with the period of activity of Giuseppe de Ribera. Born in Játiva, in the outskirts of Valencia, Spain, in 1591, Giuseppe de Ribera arrived in Italy around 1606 at the young age of 15 years old. He first settled in Rome, where he became a talented follower of Caravaggio, who had just left the city to go to Naples. 10 years after Caravaggio, and in much less dramatic circumstances, he followed his path again, moving to Naples, where he married Caterina Zollino, the daughter of the leading painter in that city. The date of Ribera's arrival in Naples almost exactly coincides with the nomination of Pedro Teles Rijon, third Duke of Osuna, as viceroy. Osuna was a member of an important family of the province of Seville in southern Spain, and there is actually a legend about how Ribera and Osuna met. According to the Neapolitan 18th century historian Bernardo de Domenici, Ribera once arrived in Naples, exhibited in the street a painting of the martyrdom of Saint Bartholomew. Noticing the crowd that rapidly formed around the picture, the viceroy asked to see it. And when reading the signature, Spagnolo, the Spaniard, he was so pleased to find such a talented compatriot in Naples that he decided to appoint him as court painter. We will never know how much true this story is, but it was pleasant enough to inspire the 19th century French painter Robert Fleury this charming painting, although it changed a bit the story, and you see this is a drawing that Ribera is holding in his hand, and it's not about the painting. Soon, the viceroy put Ribera at work, commissioning from him an important set of pictures for the church of his fief of Osuna, 2 martyrdoms, Saint Bartholomew and Saint Laurent, and 2 images of repentance, Saint Peter in Tyre and Saint Jerome, as well as a large and stunning crucifixion, probably Ribera's earliest masterpiece. The paintings didn't reach Spain before the 1620s, but then they had a strong influence on Spanish artists like Zurbarán and perhaps even the young Velázquez. Osuna's successor, the Duke of Alba, followed the taste of his predecessor, commissioning painting from Ribera for himself, but mostly for the new king of Spain, Philip IV, who was redecorating his palace in Madrid, known as the Alcazar. Unfortunately, most of those perished during a fire in 1734. One of the few Ribera paintings that can be related to Alba's patronage is the preparation for the crucifixion from the church of Cologudo, a picture he presented as a gift to Fernando Afán de Ribera y Teles Rijon, third Duke of Alcalá, who had replaced him in 1629. Along with Osuna, whose sister he had married, Alcalá was probably Ribera's most devoted patron. He commissioned very important paintings from him, starting with the famous and quite disturbing Donna Barbuta, the Bird Woman, and a no less famous series of 4 philosophers, of which one is conserved in Texas at the Meadows Museum. Here it is. Alcalá played also an important role in importing Italian and Neapolitan paintings to Spain that consequently influenced the taste of Spanish collectors and the style of Spanish artists. Here are some examples now conserved in the Seville Cathedral. this painting by Artemisia Gentileschi, but probably not from the Neapolitan period, probably from the Florentine period. And those paintings, sorry, I took the picture and I'm not very proud of me. This painting by Giovanni Battista Caravaggio and Mattia Preti that are in the cathedral then. But the key figure of these years in terms of trans-Mediterranean artistic exchanges was no doubt the Count of Monterey. A very powerful man, the Count of Monterey married the sister of the Count Duke of Olivares, Prime Minister of the King of Spain, while Olivares married Monterey's own sister, securing twice the common interests of their families. And you see here a portrait of the wife of the Count of Monterey, painted by Velázquez. The painting is in Berlin. A great diplomat, his missions to James I in London and Henry IV in Paris, as well as his acquaintance with Cassiano del Pozzo and Cardinal Francesco Barberini during their legation in Madrid in 1626, gave him opportunities to meet and see some of the greatest collections of his time, encouraging an appetite for art that would not diminish. Appointed ambassador in Rome in 1629, he secured major acquisitions for the Spanish crown, such as the Worship of Venus and the Bacchanal of the Andrians by Titian, then in the Ludovisi collection, and now conserved at the Prado Museum in Madrid. In Naples, where he took office in 1631, he avidly collected both for himself and for the king. The circumstances of the construction in Madrid of a new palace, the Buen Retiro, had created an important need of painting. Then, in collaboration with the Marquess of Castel Rodrigo in Rome, Monterey commissioned pictures from the best artists of his time to be sent to Spain. Works by Poussin, Claude, Rosa, sent from Rome, works by Artemisia Gentileschi, Massimo Stanzione, Paolo Finoglia, Domenico Gargiulio, Vincenzo Codazzi, and of course Ribera, sent from Naples. And I show you here two very important examples that are now at the Prado, an Artemisia Gentileschi and the Massimo Stanzione about the life of Saint John the Baptist. It was a series. But Monterey's major enterprise was no doubt his commission for his hometown of Salamanca. First conceived to be placed in a chapel, but eventually reworked and installed in the church of the Augustine nuns, protected by Monterey, this large altarpiece is a manifesto of his taste for modern Italian art. Carved by the Neapolitan sculptor Cosimo Fanzago and adorned with statues by Giuliano Finelli, this monumental retablo includes 6 paintings by important contemporary artists: a Saint John the Baptist by Guido Reni, it is, a Saint Joseph by Alessandro Turchi, and a Saint Augustine by Rubens and his studio. This one remains anonymous, if you have an idea. And obviously, 2 paintings by Ribera. The first Riberain date is the Pietà, dated 1634, evidently inspired by a Pietà executed by Daniele Crespi in 1626 that very likely was in Naples, where Ribera could see it. It's now at the Prado. Then, the monumental, even gigantic, Immaculate, right in the center and in the main compartment of the altarpiece, dated 1635. Stilistically, it corresponds to the moment when Ribera had left behind him his dark Tenebrista manner to privilege color and light in his art, influenced by the Bolognese artist Carpio just mentioned. Clearly, Monterey gave Ribera the most prominent exposure in his project. Moreover, the inventory of his collection made in 1653 listed no fewer than 18 paintings by the artist. Actually, he commissioned him another picture for the Church of the Augustinas, depicting the patron figures of the order, Saint Augustine. This work would compete in the church with other contemporary paintings, both by Spanish or Italian artists like Giovanni Lanfranco and Antonio de Pereda, making this church one of the best and most eloquent testimony of Spanish-Italian artistic connection in the 17th century, almost a temple of painting, securing Ribera's fame in Spain. It is indeed the painter's personal contacts in Naples with the Spanish society that fostered Ribera's reputation on the Iberian Peninsula. Why then did he never consider moving back to Spain? Actually, the Spanish painter and theoretician Giuseppe Martinez asked him the question when he visited him in Naples in 1625. And Ribera's answer was crystal clear. I quote, "Spain is a loving mother to foreigners, but a most cruel stepmother to her own." Mentioning, unquote, mentioning to Martinez a very famous Spanish say, "Quien está bien, no se mueva." He who is happy, let him remain where he is. Ribera's strategy was right, and he enjoyed all his life long a very successful career in Naples, while he also became one of the most influential artists in Spain, thanks to the successive viceroys' acquisition policies. And I would like to show you some clear examples of the strong grip Ribera had on the Spanish school. So let's start in south of Spain, in Seville, where Ribera's paintings are documented as early as 1621, but some may have arrived earlier, actually. So you can see Ribera's influence on Velázquez, for instance, who probably knew some of Ribera's apostles or philosophers with this direct frontal approach, almost brutal, and the gray, brown, red tonality of his palette at the moment. Later, when in Madrid, it seems that Ribera remained kind of a reference for Velázquez if you consider this full-length representation of the philosopher Aesop, painted a few years after Ribera's St. James reached the Escorial. Zurbarán is another artist in Seville who must have meditated Ribera's formulas and manner. Is Saint Jerome, with his large gesture and harsh contrast of light and shadow, evokes at once the one Ribera painted for the Church of the Santissima Trinità delle Monache in Naples, Ribera's first public commission in the city. Another name I would like to mention is Alonso Cano, showing you these two very Riberesque painting of his, dated in 1635. One is conserved in the Church of San Ginés in Madrid, and the other at the Worcester Art Museum in the United States. I wanted also to mention this painting, which is a very enigmatic painting that I personally attribute to Alonso Cano, but it's disputed. It was once thought it would be by Velázquez. Actually, it was quite a famous painting of Velázquez in the 19th century, then ascribed to the Neapolitan school, but unconvincingly, recently published under the name of Ribera, but again, unconvincingly, and I personally think that it could be the young Alonso Cano. But what is clear is that this painting, whoever painted it knew about Ribera and knew about Ribera adorations of the shepherds. A generation later, Murillo still follows Ribera's aesthetic and compositions in his early years, as showed his adoration of the shepherds, or the very famous young beggar from the Louvre, clearly inspired by Ribera's Saint Paul in Meditation. There was one version in the Prado and a workshop version at the Meadows Museum in Dallas. But this phenomenon wasn't limited to Andalusia. And actually, in Madrid, many painters emulated Ribera, especially when dealing with the iconography of Saint Jerome, proving the huge success of Ribera's invention spread through paintings and prints. Sometimes artists were really inspired. That's the case of Cabezalero here, this is the painting of the Meadows, or Antonio de Pereda, painting from the Prado. Some other times, the result is a more servile copy, and this is the case of the Kientz or the Puga, or in Valencia, this is the case of Esteban March, and you see here actually quite a poor interpretation, it's almost plagiarism, of the Saint Paul by Ribera, that is in the Louvre. But I want to show you another good painting of Esteban March because he is actually a good painter. No, I want to be fair. Valencia was the hometown of Ribera, and it is likely that the contacts he maintained there encouraged another Spanish artist to cross the Mediterranean Sea and to try his luck in Naples. His name was Juan Do, or in Italian, Giovanni Do. He was born in Jativa, just like Ribera, 10 years after him in 1601. In 1617, there is a painter named Juan Dos that appears on document in Valencia, but it's not clear whether it is our painter or not. What is sure is that our Juan Do is documented in Naples in 1626, where he is marrying the daughter of the painter Filippo Vitale, whose son was also a painter. Do was then quite well integrated in the artistic Neapolitan society and very likely worked in Ribera's studio, as his style can tell, thanks to the very few paintings that can be attributed to him. And I show you one from a church in Naples. That's actually the only painting that is described in the 18th century by the Domenici as a painting by Giovanni Do, by Juan Do, and based on this painting, on this information, all the paintings have been attributed to him. I show you two examples, one from the Real Academia de San Fernando in Madrid and another one in the Louvre. So you see, he's a very close pupil follower of Ribera. Another pupil of Ribera that would be in close connection with Spain is Luca Giordano, or in Spanish, Luca Jordan. He was born in 1734, and his early works are quite reminiscent of Ribera's world, you can see here. In certain cases, he even tries to compete with Ribera, as shows his version of Apollo and Marsyas. Soon, Luca Giordano became a famous and wanted artist throughout Italy, from Naples to Rome and to Florence. Again, it has been thanks to the ingenuity of the Spanish viceroys that he agreed to come back to Naples and eventually to go to Spain. Oh, this is a picture of the two paintings in Sylvain Bélanger's show about Luca Giordano, now in Paris. The Marquess del Carpio, great collector and art lover, managed, when he was viceroy between 1683 and 1687, to acquire from Giordano about 59 works for himself and more than 100 for the king. His successor, Francisco de Benavides, Count of Santisteban, convinced Luca Giordano to accept the invitation of Charles II to come to Spain, where he eventually achieved the large decorations of the many palaces and monasteries the Spanish crown had been building during the 17th century, nourishing a constant need and taste for art and talent that benefited to the Neapolitan school as much as the Neapolitan painters improved the development of art in Spain. While Ribera didn't want to come back to Spain, Giordano happily settled in Spain for a while, and so did Corrado Giaquinto years later, and Tiepolo later on again. They all found there a most welcoming and art-loving nation, quite different from the one Ribera had left in 1606. And this is largely thanks to the constant efforts and impeccable taste of the viceroys. Indeed, they were not only powerful noblemen or important statesmen. They were not only good politicians or great diplomats. They were representing the King of Spain in Italy, but they became somehow also ambassadors of Italian art in Spain. And therefore, they were truly the important taste makers, or the way we would put it, today they were great, in our time of social media, they were great and major influencers. Thank you.